Chapter 34. Arriving at work that morning, Admiral Kenneth G. Brinstock marveled at the mini-city that made up the Pentagon. After clearing security, several members of the armed forces passed him as he walked down the corridors toward his office on the C ring. Once he got to where his administrative assistant worked, signs could be seen announcing, "You are in a sensitive compartmentalized information facility." SCIF. His office was the pinnacle of all SCIFs found in this building, since he was responsible for the bulk of naval intelligence. His administrative assistant, Sergeant Larry Flume, had already been hard at work long before Kenji arrived. There were several thousand who had been working since about 4:30 a.m. that morning. The sergeant had only been at his desk since 7 a.m. His first responsibility each day was to prepare a briefing for the Admiral, summarizing all correspondence which had come in from the field, as well as all requests for information. Next was a listing of any meetings scheduled either by Kenji himself or by his superiors. Finally, space was reserved for any miscellaneous issues the Sergeant Flume felt were necessary to bring up. He was studious enough to not allow any necessary business to fall through the cracks. In fact, he was just now completing notes and materials for the morning briefing. Knowing Kenji's routines, he understood the briefing would only occur after a strong cup of military mud had been poured. This cup was one of about 30,000 poured at the Pentagon that day. At 8:10 a.m. sharp, Sergeant Flume knocked on Kenji's door. "Come." The door opened, and per normal procedure, the sergeant took his position at the sitting area in the Admiral's office. Kenji preferred to sit on the couch for his meetings instead of at his desk, creating more of a connection with his subordinates. Rising from his desk, he walked to his customary chair with a cup of coffee in his hand. "What do we have today, Larry?" began Kenji. "Sir, there are several different matters to attend to today. First, there are reports from the USGS on a situation brewing in Yellowstone. Second, there are some questions from the commanders of the Northern Fleet about preparations for the NATO exercises scheduled later this month. Third, there is a letter from the Secretary of Defense to the Joint Chiefs of Staff for you to review and comment. Fourth, there are some details which need to be worked out concerning your upcoming trip to Midway Magnetic in California. Finally, there are a couple of other miscellaneous items." "Okay, let's start with the reports from the USGS. What's happening there?" said Kenji. Handing the Admiral a package labeled Eyes Only, Sergeant Flume explained the latest from the field. "Sir, as you can see from this package of information, there is a potential critical situation in Yellowstone. According to Dr. Morrison in the Montana Bureau of the United States Geological Survey, Yellowstone is showing signs indicating the magma chamber underneath the park is preparing to erupt." "Do you have the response plans we put into place after the Mount St. Helens blast?" asked Kenji. Yes, sir, I have that information available. If I can direct your attention to a paragraph on page 17 of the briefing, you'll see that Dr. Morrison, along with several of his colleagues, indicate there is actually no comparison between that eruption and with the volcanoes at Yellowstone. "How much of a no comparison?" asked Kenji. "According to the data presented by several of the most reliable personnel at the USGS, the Yellowstone eruption is going to be hundreds of times larger than the volcanic explosion associated with Mount St. Helens in western Oregon," answered Sergeant Flume. "Hundreds?" asked the Admiral, somewhat incredulously. "Sir, do you remember the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991? asked the sergeant. "Yes. At the time I was stationed in the Atlantic, but I remember hearing about it," said Kenji. "Since you were stationed in the Atlantic at the time, you may remember Hurricane Andrew in August 1992. At the time, it was the most destructive hurricane in United States history and was felt from the Bahamas to Louisiana." "Boy, do I remember that one," said Kenji. "We were deployed by the President to help with disaster relief for quite some time. The destruction I saw is something that I will never forget. And Hurricane Iniki hit the Hawaiian Islands in September 1992. Yep. I remember hearing about that one while we had our hands full with Andrew. It seemed like Mother Nature was really pissed off that year, replied Kenji. Sir, according to the USGS historical meteorologists, there is overwhelming evidence those hurricanes were directly related to the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines, responded Sergeant Flume. How's that possible, with the locations being so far apart? Asked Kenji. According to the briefing, an ash cloud that rose up into the atmosphere was carried by the winds across the globe, causing drops in temperature which directly affected the global weather. Thinking about what Larry said, Kenji asked, So what does Pinatubo have to do with Yellowstone? The reason the meteorologists briefly mentioned Pinatubo is because the volcano in Yellowstone is classified as a supervolcano and is actually 100 times larger than Pinatubo. If what the USGS says is correct, when Yellowstone blows, it will be an extinction-level event. Everything will be affected, and there is a good chance the human race won't survive. Hearing this, the Admiral, who had been leaning forward during the start of the conversation, now sat back against the couch seat. And why is this something the doctors are hot and bothered about now? I know it isn't a new volcano. It's been dormant for thousands of years. Sir, to summarize the briefing, apparently there are several indicators the volcano has recently awakened. 5 miles below Yellowstone, there is a magma chamber which has fed the 3 prior supervolcano eruptions that happened there, dating back 2.1 million years ago. About every 600,000 to 650,000 years, a new eruption happens, and we are now due. When you combine that with the fact the geysers, which are a very consistent feature of the park, have spontaneously stopped, and when you take into consideration the floor of the Yellowstone Valley, itself a volcanic cone spanning hundreds of kilometers across, has risen about 200 meters vertically, it indicates the chamber is rapidly filling with superheated magma. Based on how fast things are changing there, the experts expect an eruption any time in the next 12 months, explained Sergeant Flume. Good God, was the only response that came to Kenji's mind. After thinking about it for a moment, he asked, Do they have any suggestions in mind? They are requesting that the full force of the Pentagon be put to finding an answer, was the sergeant's reply. I will analyze this material today. If I agree with your assessments, then I will take this to the President himself and ask him to create an executive order for exactly that. I'm sure this wouldn't do any good, but even if it required a nuke to relieve the pressure, then I'd do it. That comment set the sergeant back on his heels. He wasn't a pacifist by any means, but knowing how incredibly stingy Kenji was about anything having to do with nuclear weapons, Sergeant Flume knew he had been successful in conveying how serious the situation was. Nodding his head and taking a deep breath, Sergeant Flume decided to get his thoughts back on track. He gave the Admiral a few moments to read through some of the materials in the USGS briefing packet. Are you ready to move on to the next item, sir? Hang on a second, Larry, replied Kenji. Reaching for the phone, he picked up the receiver and hit the intercom button. Yes, sir, came the polished response from the other end of the line. Stephanie, please get in touch with the White House and ask to schedule a classified Level 1 meeting with the President for my assistant and me tomorrow. This is top priority and top secret, understand? Sergeant Flume, who had been looking down at the rest of his meeting notes, now glanced up at the Admiral when he heard that he was to be part of the meeting. This would be the first time he would meet the President. The sergeant's reaction wasn't lost on Kenji. For a split second he thought about how Larry was one of the best assistants he'd ever had, and deserved to be part of the briefing. I'll have a response for you in 10 minutes, sir, replied Stephanie. Thanks, Stephanie, replied Kenji. He placed the receiver down and glanced at Larry, who still looked a little flustered. Kenji smiled, then said, "Larry, I'm going to need you to step up to the plate on this and have your facts and figures together. I'll give the highlights, but I'm going to rely on you to present the bulk of the details the President may want to know. Keep it straight and keep it factual. You're a good man, and you'll do fine, I'm certain of it." The vote of confidence coming from the Admiral was something Larry had been working for tooth and nail during the entire 3 years he had been Admiral Brinstock's assistant. He made a practice of checking his facts, then triple-checking them again. Kenji recognized that Larry's patterns were not unlike the perfectionistic patterns of a much younger version of himself. He thought to himself, "This kid is going to go far in this man's navy." Recognizing the political incorrectness of his last thought, the Admiral decided to keep that observation to himself. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate it," replied Larry. "What's next?" asked Kenji to keep the meeting moving. "Sir, the commanders of the Northern Fleet have some questions for you. This is the fleet taking part in the joint NATO exercises next month. Here." Larry handed a sheet to Kenji. "There aren't any babies crying here. They can be answered at your leisure." "Sounds good. Next," responded Kenji. "There is a letter from Defense Secretary Hume congratulating you on the way you handled the situation 2 weeks ago in Nicaragua. The one remaining member of the terrorist cell who was hiding in the Pearl Lagoon on the East Coast is on the run. According to the detachment of SEALs you dispatched, they forecast he'll be eliminated within the next 24 hours. Commander Rojas on the ground there says they've been tracking him, and it appears he's slowing down, thinking he's no longer being chased. It appears they have it well in hand." "Excellent. There's no telling what those idiots were capable of doing," observed the Admiral. "I agree, Admiral. The next item on the agenda is your upcoming trip to Sonora, California." "My what?" asked Kenji, his eyebrows furrowed together. "Sir, 2 days ago you said to schedule a trip to Midway Magnetic in Sonora, California to inspect the Collider project out there." Kenji knew exactly what was going on in California, but he also knew the details of that project were quite a bit above the sergeant's pay grade. Yes, it was a super collider project that would make the one in Sweden look like a cage made of Tinker Toys, but the real reason for its existence was known only by a handful of individuals in Washington. The President himself was keeping tight reins on the project, making sure nobody knew about its existence unless he personally signed off on their involvement. The fact that Larry had overheard the Admiral saying he wanted to go to California for an inspection was a little troubling to him. "When did you hear I wanted to go to Midway?" asked Kenji. 2 days ago you were in your office and I was sitting at my desk. You were talking to someone on the phone and you said you were planning on going there for an inspection. I took it upon myself to create the pending travel arrangements for you. All you have to do is give the word, and I will finalize them for whatever date you choose," responded Larry. Kenji grinned and shook his head. "I'm going to start calling you Radar from now on, Larry." After pausing for a moment, he added, "The word is given. Schedule the trip for 2 weeks from today." "Yes, sir," responded Sergeant Flume. Privately, Kenji took notice that he would have to be a little quieter from now on regarding that project. It was far too sensitive for anybody not authorized by the President. His assistant was good. Maybe too good. "Next?" asked Kenji. "Finally, sir, there is one item which, while not exactly something I put much credence in, I still need to bring to your attention. It's an item called in by a reservist over the weekend," said Larry. "A reservist? What did he want?" asked the Admiral. "She had quite a fantastic story, sir. Second Lieutenant Patricia Lynn Marlowe phoned in to report, well, an island located between the mainland and Bermuda. She said this island has, Larry was stammering now, not like him at all. "Spit it out, man. What's she saying?" Larry sat back ramrod straight and said, "Aliens, sir. She said the island is full of dead aliens. Kenji looked at Larry for exactly 2 seconds before starting to laugh louder than he had in a very long time. That got Larry laughing just as much. Since the door to Kenji's office was closed during the briefing, and since this was a skiff, nobody else heard the belly laughs going on in the office for the better part of a minute. With tears in his eyes, Kenji finally got some control over himself. With a few spits and starts, he said, "Larry, saving that one for last was a good move on your part." Looking at the ceiling and wiping his eyes clear, he said, "Geez, I needed that." "I'm glad, sir," responded Larry, suffering his own case of facial cramps from muscles grinning far more than they had in a long time. Standing up from the meeting, Kenji said, "Well, Sergeant, get to those arrangements." "Right away, sir," was Sergeant Flume's response. Turning on his heels, he emerged from Kenji's office and returned to his desk. He considered putting the paperwork on the alien island in the round file, but he never liked throwing anything away. He slipped the paperwork into the bottom drawer of his locked file cabinet, then proceeded to handle the California trip details. He thought the Sierra Nevada mountain range was a strange place to put a scientific installation, but oh well. Meanwhile, Kenji received Stephanie's callback. The meeting was set for tomorrow at 11:15 a.m., and they had 15 minutes. Kenji knew it would take longer, but the president was the one to make that call. "What the hell are we going to do about Yellowstone?" he thought. "Well, something will turn up, I hope." What he didn't know was something already had. Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.